This afternoon, we're at Casa De Montecristo here in Old San Juan in Puerto Rico. This is one of my favorite places to come to relax. Not only are the cigars fantastic, but the bar is outstanding, great scenery. So if you ever make it down to the Caribbean, I encourage you to pop by here and join us. You know, when I started in this business, I worked for a man named Frank Quattrone at the Credit Suisse Tech Group out in California. And he was a master, and I was very, very fortunate to be able to, I guess, for lack of a better term, apprentice under a master, because it dramatically cuts down the learning curve. You know, a lot of what we do in mergers and acquisitions, I think, is counterintuitive for people. And we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the aspects that I think are counterintuitive. But I think, you know, one of the main overarching themes and things that I've learned over the years is that every time I have gone against my better judgment and not run a competitive process, I have lived to regret that decision. You know, this is a business that I spend, 7 days a week, literally 12 plus hours a day in. And whenever we take a client out to market, even I don't know who the ultimate buyer will be. You know, I might have some good feelings, I might have some gut feelings, but I would say at least 50% of the time I am wrong. And the reason that I'm wrong is I really never can truly understand all of the motivations of all the different acquirers involved in that process. And you know, when I talk about taking a business out to market, I'm talking about taking a business out to a competitive process. So you've got the target company. We typically advise, actually not typically, exclusively advise sellers. But my goal is always to try to cast a wide enough net to get full price discovery without casting a net that's too wide and we blow confidentiality. And as we prepare to take a business out to market, I often hear sellers tell me that, company A is the most likely acquirer for the business, or company B or company C. And, more times than not, that turns out to be incorrect as well. When you own a business, you own a scarce asset. And if everything goes right for you, you have multiple acquirers vying to purchase that one scarce asset. And when you think about it, the acquirers are oftentimes going to want to talk to us independently. There's nothing better for an acquirer than a situation where the seller thinks price is objective, it's not subjective, and that they have a exclusive dialogue with the seller. Whenever I think about going out to market, I think about the various aspects and what actually creates leverage. And one of the most important aspects of leverage is the ability to run a competitive process. I've said this on the buzz countless times and on PCT M&A seminars and some presentations we've given here at POTOMAC. At the end of the day, as a seller, you've got a scarce asset, you've got a variety of acquirers vying to buy that scarce asset, and you really don't need to do a lot of negotiation. One of the things that I said is counterintuitive is when sellers find themselves in process with a bunch of buyers, we often hear things like, I'm not compelled to sell in any way, or I'm not going to give the business away. They feel like they need to actually negotiate with buyers. And my advice to sellers always in process is to never feel like you're in a position where you need to negotiate, because if you come from a position of strength, the facts should in fact speak for themselves, right? If you have a scarce asset that multiple acquirers are vying to purchase, you don't need to be the one to negotiate. You're going to let them do the negotiation for you on the other side of the table. It's when you feel like you actually need to sell and to negotiate, I think that you're actually giving up strength in a process. And the acquirers often, as I mentioned earlier, want to find themselves in a position where, hey, Mr. Smith, we love your company, we want to buy it. We're going to be extremely competitive with any other acquirers. You don't need to talk to anyone else, just talk to us. It puts them in a real significant position of strength. So one of the most important lessons I've learned over the years is if you have an asset to sell, you need to be the process setter. You need to take control of the sale process from the standpoint of controlling competition, as well as controlling information flow, as well as controlling the use of time. And what I mean by that is, if you're selling an asset, you can use time to your advantage. You can use deadlines. I often think about, when I graduated from Cornell, I graduated from the School of Industrial and Labor Relations, and we spent a lot of our time focused on collective bargaining and negotiations. And, inevitably in any sort of union negotiation, as we all know, the concessions take place within minutes of the strike deadline, right? So the strike deadline's at midnight, and the collective bargaining agreement is often negotiated at 10 minutes to midnight, because that is a deadline and it impacts both parties. And when I think about the use of time in a transaction, I think about the use of a deadline, but a deadline that impacts the negotiation unilaterally. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. If I'm running a process and I have an asset that I'm selling, and I've got 10 buyers out there, I'm going to establish an initial deadline for a proposal that's arbitrary. It's one that I've come up with. I'm not under any compulsion to sell. I want to get a variety of acquirers interested. But now I impose the deadline, and it impacts the process unilaterally, which means that it only impacts the buyers. It doesn't impact me. I'm in control of it. It's not a strike deadline that both the union and management need to make mad concessions immediately prior to midnight. Otherwise, everyone goes out and strike. And we both know that neither the union nor management wants a strike, because it negatively impacts both sides. But if you can cause a party to act under the pressure of a deadline that impacts them and does not impact you, that creates a profound amount of leverage and strength in a process. So let me walk you through how I think that should work. When you take a business out to market and you have the initial proposals due from all the acquirers on a certain timeline, they've got that deadline. They've got to deliver the offers or the bid letters. And as you move through a competitive process, it's important, again, that anytime you're whittling down the playing field and negotiating with less and less buyers, you always, on the sell side, want to control that deadline. So the next round of bids are due at Friday at 5 p.m. And if you run the process right and you don't give the acquirers a tremendous amount of wiggle room around the deadline, it forces them to act. Otherwise, they are removed from the process. The wrong way for this to work is, let's say you and I are partners in a business. We go out and we start haphazardly to talk to acquirers. They all want to deal with us, but we're smart enough to know, hey, we got to bring competition into the mix. So we talk to 3 acquirers. They request some information from us and we say, look, we're interested in doing business with you, put together a proposal. So the acquirers start to draft their proposals, but we haven't established a deadline. Now we find ourselves in a position where we get one offer on Monday, we're waiting. We get another offer on Friday, we're waiting. Now we're looking for that third offer. And if we start calling that acquirer up, I mean, there's a really good chance we lose leverage, because now we're actually looking for that offer. We didn't impose the deadline on the front end. We're now looking for that offer. And then the other 2 acquirers that have already tendered their offers or bid letters to buy the business are now wondering what the hell we're doing. Why are we sitting on the offer? Are we not interested? Are we playing hard to get? What is it that we're doing? Furthermore, we end up in a position where we're not comparing apples to apples, so to speak. We are in a position where we're receiving offers intertemporally over time, and we're not able to lay them out on the table and compare them directly. And so we always find ourselves, I think, in positions like that. We're in somewhat of the bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, right? Because we're still waiting for the third acquirer, but now the first 2 acquirers that have tendered the offers, guess what they're going to do? They're going to start to get antsy. if within a matter of a few days or a few weeks, they're going to begin to impose deadlines on us. Now they're going to say, hey, Paul, our offer explodes at 5 p.m. on Friday. You either accept it or we walk away. And we've effectively handed control of our process to an acquirer. And now they can push us around. So we never, ever want to find ourselves in that sort of a position. As I was saying earlier in the discussion, we never know who the ultimate buyer of the business is going to be. Like I said, you put a gun to my head on our processes, more than 50% of the time I'm wrong as to who the ultimate buyer is going to be. And again, I do this every single day of the week, and I've done it for decades. So I expect your accuracy level to be far lower than mine. So we want to cast a wide enough net. We want to think about strategic or industrial buyers, those folks that are in the industry that are going to buy the business, as well as we want to think about private equity, the financial sponsors out there, as well as non-industrial buyers. And I've learned a valuable lesson over the years, which is never make an assumption in your mind or put a no in a buyer's mouth. You certainly don't want to have a pest control business or an HVAC business or a plumbing business and go to a master Dairy Queen franchise and say, are you interested in buying this business? That makes scant sense. But if you look out at the industry acquirers, as well as those on the periphery, as well as the financial sponsors, you never want to make the assumption that a particular buyer won't be interested in it, because again, you never know what's going on behind the scenes. I can sit here today and talk about countless transactions that I've been directly responsible for leading over the years, where acquirers have stepped in and bought businesses for reasons none other than the fact that they were going to miss earnings one quarter and needed to plug a hole in their P&L, and went out and spent 100 or 200 million bucks to do so. I mean, at the end of the day, these transactions are between people. They're between executives at publicly traded companies and private equity professionals and sellers. And motivations are often not extremely abundant or evident to us. If you've got I can give you a transaction that I'm working on this very morning, is a cross-border transaction between a U.S. and a European company that targets in Europe, the acquirers in the United States. The only reason why this deal is taking place, and the only reason why it's taking place at the price at which it's being transacted at, is because this particular acquirer has tens of millions of dollars in trapped cash outside the United States. And if they were to repatriate that cash, they'd have to pay a large tax on it. So is it a deal that I think they're entirely thrilled about doing? Probably not. Is it a price that they really want to be paying? No. But the return on buying that business in their mind is greater than taking that cash, repatriating it to the United States, paying that tax, and then using it for corporate purposes in the US. So again, my main point in all of this is never assume you know who the acquirer is going to be. Keep a very, very open mind. Always take control of the process. And again, I'm not going to go into extreme detail on this today because I've talked about it in a ton of detail on the Buzz. Another thing that I was actually thinking about, today is July 27th, 2022, and we had the Federal Reserve, the FOMC, came out with another interest rate decision this afternoon. As a matter of fact, we're giving this, we're having this chat now during the interest rate decision. And the market fully expects the Fed to increase policy rate by 75 basis points. Over the last 48 hours, we've heard from Walmart that revised down forward guidance, basically on earnings, talking about the deteriorating U.S. consumer. We saw companies like Sherwin-Williams revise forward guidance. Their stock tanked. I mean, as I was preparing to sit down and light this cigar, Rollins, owner of Orkin in the pest control industry, missed earnings and their stock traded down 5 or 6% on it in a very, very up day in the market. And makes me think about something I often think about, which is investing. Don't invest for the present. Meaning, when you're thinking about allocating resources and capital in your business, you have to constantly be thinking about 6, 12, 24 months ahead. The things that you do today, oftentimes, and I hear it, and I know this because I hear from our clients every single day, folks are always looking at trailing performance. They're always looking at the number of calls that come into their office today, yesterday, 30 days from now. But, when we find ourselves in an environment like the summer of 2022, where we've got a Fed relentlessly hiking into a downturn, right? So I think at this point, there's very little doubts that the US is going into a recession. There's very little doubts that we're experiencing a downturn. Of course, we've got a Fed hiking into that. That has yet to really hit the consumer. That has yet to really hit the business environment. So now is a time to really invest for what things will be like in a year from now or 2 years from now, as opposed to where they are right now. Because at the end of the day, you're focused on forward cash flow, right? I mean, your business is a bundle of resources that generates cash flow into the future. And as we start to enter into downturns like this, I think you really need to invest as if we're already in a downturn. Don't invest for the present, invest for the future. And this is one of the, I think, most important personal investing decisions that I've made over the years, is just kind of understanding when it's raining today and where things are going to be 12. It's impossible to predict the future. But if we understand where we are today in the market cycle, I think we can make very, very important decisions about where we're going to be a couple of years from now. A couple of the things that I want to talk about today really include the impact of private equity and in a variety of the residential and home services space. Over the last 24 months, of course, we've all been locked up with COVID, and there's been a lot of institutional money that has chased residential services, more so than commercial services, but still we see it on the commercial service side. Any route-based recurring revenue business that puts a person in the truck and sends them out to a home or business has experienced a lot of asset price inflation over the last 24 months. In lawn, we've seen a lot of transactions with private equity. Fairway Lawns was just acquired last month. In the pest control industry, I fully expect to see, 7 or 8 private equity firms in the industry by the end of the year. We've got a lot of these financial sponsors that are looking to do platform acquisitions. But, I look at private equity, an industry that I come from originally. I spent years on the buy side, working for the largest publicly traded private equity firm in the United States. And I'm starting to see a lot of things that remind me of what it was like in 2001 and 2002, a recessionary period in the United States, as well as, things that remind me of 2007, 2008, and 2009. Private equity is a very illiquid, levered equity play. And what I mean by that is private equity firms use equity and then they lever it. They go out and they borrow 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 times EBITDA to make to contemplate and consummate transactions. In times of extreme liquidity, we see a lot of private equity transactions. And in the last few years, we've seen a lot of private equity transactions that I view, quite frankly, as almost a Ponzi scheme, where you have one private equity firm selling a portfolio company or one of its assets to another private equity firm that turns around and sells it to another private equity firm as valuations continue to go up. And that's largely been driven by a tremendous amount of liquidity and real interest rates that are negative. I think what we're likely to see over the next 12 to 24 months is private equity firms that have entered into these residential and commercial services businesses rapidly sell them and get out. And I think we're going to ultimately see a very robust slowdown in private equity activity as we start to get into 2023. I really think that from my perspective, particularly in lawn and pest, I think the platform acquisitions in pest control will be done this year. And I think in lawn care as well. And quite frankly, when I look across plumbing, HVAC, those other services businesses, I think we literally have 6 to 9 months. Those private equity firms will pay to play now. They'll spend a lot of money to get platforms. But I think by the time 2023 rolls around, they're just going to focus on add-on acquisitions to blend down their multiples or entry multiples into these spaces. So one of the most important lessons that I've learned over the last, 22 years being in investment banking and M&A advisory is the guys who have really knocked it out of the park are the entrepreneurs that really, truly understand the market cycle. The people that are able to look at what strategic acquirers are doing and what private equity firms are doing, sell when the markets are very hot, and turn around and buy when there's effectively blood on the street, as the old saying goes. I think there's going to be a lot of value opportunities here in the coming years. I think that here in July of 2022, we see the Russell 2000 down 17, 18%. We see the NASDAQ down, from its peak, probably about 30%. I truly believe that these markets have a long way to go. And I think those business owners who listen to our presentations, Aftermath, Supernova, Bubble Trouble, who took advantage of being able to sell at the very, very height of the market, in the coming months are going to be able to reap substantial rewards by taking that cash and deploying it into relatively undervalued assets. So if you're a man or a woman in your 40s, 50s, or even 60s, I think you have a lot of runway to be able to dispose of an asset that's extremely overvalued still yet today and turn around and redeploy that cash, effectively doubling down on that. Because as I've talked about incessantly on the buzz, and I know some of my colleagues here at POTOMAC are tired of hearing me talk about it, I think valuations will be dramatically lower 12 months from now than they are today. And I'm actually putting my money where my mouth is, as the old saying goes, don't tell me what you think, show me what's in your portfolio. And I am very heavily short European and US equities. So I think understanding the market cycle and understanding that, I don't believe for a second that this market goes down for 6 to 12 months and all of a sudden turns back up. I think that we are likely in for, a period like 1974 or the late 70s or the early 80s, where it's going to be a long drawn out period of dismal returns. So again, that's my opinion, but I really spend a lot of time myself thinking about the market cycle. And if you're truly an investor thinking about risk and return, I challenge you to do the same in your own business. Some of the things that I've thought about over the years with regard to sophisticated sellers, I once wrote an article about an Australian fella who called me up, and I can't remember what year this was. I was living in Paris at the time. It may have been 2013 or 2014. And he had a business that was just too small for me to deal with in Australia. And I talked to him a half dozen times over the years. I actually really liked the guy, and we ended up, I don't want to say we became friends, but we did, I think, enjoy the conversations that we had over the years. And he tried to engage POTOMAC to sell his business. And I said, look, you're quite small. I'm not going to be able to provide you the type of service that you deserve, but I'm going to help you any way I can, because at the end of the day, I view my most important role in the industries that we cover as somebody who ruthlessly protects the business owner against the sophisticated private equity firms and the large publicly traded acquirers. I mean, at the end of the day, as the Mexican likes to call them, these are trust fund babies playing with somebody else's money. So I really view my role as, if I do nothing else, I protect the husband and wife that own a business. I protect the small private equity firms that own businesses. I protect the search funds that own businesses. I protect people like you when you face off against the sophisticated private equity firms and strategic acquirers out there. And so I told this fellow I'm willing to help him. And as he began to talk to acquirers, I got a kick out of being in the background telling him some things to say. But he began to negotiate, and he did a great job. He went out to a variety of acquirers. He set an appropriate deadline to receive a bid. He determined what sort of information he was going to share. And when he started to get the bids, there was one party that he really liked, and he actually hoped to do a deal with them. And I advised him, I said, you know what, always attempt to be as agnostic as you can as to who the acquirer is until you get to that final round of bidding. Let the dollars and cents, let the terms talk to you. And then at the end of the day, when you get to the very end of the process, you've got full price discovery and you know how much, you're within pennies where you know where the final purchase price will be, then you can make the mature decision to say, you know what, I'm going to leave some money on the table because I want to do business with these guys. But try really hard to save that sort of decision making until the very end. So he went through this process and he finally got himself exactly where I wanted him to be, which was in a runoff between two acquirers. And he called me up. It was nighttime, my time, super early his time. He was having a cup of coffee. I was actually smoking a cigar at the time. I remember this. I remember exactly where I was sitting. And he said, Paul, these guys got on a plane. They came over here in person, and I'm ready to go to battle. I'm going to sit down and negotiate with these last two parties. And he knew his numbers. He had everything figured out. He knew exactly the arguments he was going to make. And I said to him, this is the absolute worst thing that you could possibly do. One of the worst things that a seller could do is it's very natural to want to be a killer negotiator, to be sophisticated, to know your numbers, to, drive a hard bargain. But I tell sellers the best thing that you can be is be ignorant of the process and constantly remind those acquirers of that at every point in the process. Remind them of how much you do not know and how much you're trusting them, because, if you think about a street fight, you see a guy walking down the street and another guy's a real asshole. Well, like, everyone and their uncle actually cheers when that asshole gets his head cracked, right? And then you want the bully to be beat up. But, if you see a guy who's a nice guy who finds himself in a fight, but doesn't look like he should be there, like, you kind of root for that guy. You don't want him to, he's a nice guy. And so I told this fella, I said, listen, you're not going to go in there and negotiate. You're going to let the process that you've established negotiate for you. You're not going to seem like you know more than you do. You're not even going to seem like you know as much as you do. You're going to constantly show them how little you know. And you're going to remind them of that you're putting their trust and faith in them. And it makes it very difficult for acquirers to beat you up if you come into this humble. But I said, the most important thing you're going to do is they know that you're not running a formal process with a sell-side advisor. You're going to go in there and say, you know what? I am an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea. You guys could be paying me far more than you should be. You could be totally taking advantage of me. I have zero idea. But one thing I do know, at this stage of the process, I'm doing myself a disservice and I need to hire a sophisticated advisor. So I'm going to bring in POTOMAC and they're going to take it from here. And I anticipated that the second the threat of the auction came out, that these acquirers were going to changed their tune. And sure enough, the acquirer that he really wanted to do business with increased the purchase price. Again, this was a small business, over $1 million Australian dollars within a 24-hour period. I fully believe him being humble, him being courteous, him being very respectful and thankful of their time, and him saying, you know what, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm going to hire somebody to help me. That's what ultimately got him the extra money. The threat of bringing in an advisor to advise him, I don't think he would have ever been able to do that had he taken a hard approach. So I always advise our clients to be friendly and humble. You know, don't be desperate. As a Mexican likes to say, you don't want to be, you know, the 48-year-old single mom of 4 sitting at the bar, right? That's not, you don't want to be the desperate loser, and you certainly don't want to be the asshole. And if you time these sorts of discussions right, and you use the threat of the auction, you don't even have to negotiate. Again, like I always say, let the facts speak from themselves. If you're in a position of strength, you don't have to tell anyone that. It's usually the people that are not in positions of strength have to tell you how strong they are. So after that transaction was done, this particular seller actually offered, he said, I'm going to pay you for your time. And I said, you know what? I get great joy in doing this sort of stuff. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, and it's going to make for a good story one day. And, you know, he ended up actually sending a check over to our office, and it was a check that had no return address on it. We couldn't even figure out who it was from. And ultimately it popped up that it was him. And I was very grateful that he paid me for my time and effort. Quite frankly, he didn't pay me for that. What he paid me for is the powerful brand that we've established in this industry, that as soon as he mentioned our name, considering, you know, we do more than 70% of the global transactions in the industry, the fact that he was able to actually mention the POTOMAC name, scaring the shit out of the acquirers, to me, that was recompense enough. You know, recently we did a Bubble Trouble presentation in May, and I've gotten a lot of questions from folks about kind of predicting where the market's going to be 6 to 12 months from now. And, you know, as valuations have gone up across all industries over the last 10 years, but more acutely in the last 5, sellers were rewarded for doing certain things. They were rewarded for going out and making acquisitions, going out and buying smaller companies at lower multiples, and turning around on the arbitrage play, selling a larger business to an acquirer. And, you know, if you want to hear a quick little 2-minute tale of 2 individuals who've done this just in spectacular fashion, is Jason Pananos and Jay Davis. You know, on our YouTube site, POTOMAC TV, we've got a section called the POTOMAC Experience. When you look for Jason Pananos, these are 2 Harvard MBAs that got together, bought a small business. I think it was doing $5 or $6 million at the time, did 14 acquisitions and turned around and sold it to Rent-A-Kill. It was just a text. It is actually, I say it's a textbook example. It is a textbook example. Harvard Business School and I think Stanford both did a case study on these guys. So it is a business school textbook example of 2 guys who went out and bought a small business, did acquisitions at very, very low valuations, and turned around and printed money when they sold to an international publicly traded acquirer. But people had been rewarded, you know, as valuations go up, you're rewarded for that sort of activity. You're rewarded for dumping a lot of money into marketing. You're rewarded for doing door-to-door sales, whether it's in pest control or lawn or solar or alarms. You're rewarded for these sorts of things when the cost of money is basically less than free and asset prices are going up. When clients and folks in the industry call up and say, you know, where are we going to be 6 to 12 months from now? I just need a little bit more time. I've got a great thing going right now. business has been robust. If I can get 6 more months, I'll get all of those financial results on my P&L, and I know my business will be worth more. And they might very well be correct. But I guess when I look at it, and if it were me, I would say you've got 2 components to valuation. The P and the E, right? The price and the earnings. In that particular equation, if the multiple stays constant and the E goes up, the earnings, well, the price goes up. If the E goes up or down, or I'm sorry, if the E remains the same, the earnings, and the multiple goes up or down, of course, the price goes down. So you have to think about things in terms of the P and the E, and that's a multiple. Where are you going to be able to take earnings? Well, in this environment, like, the tremendous amount of fiscal and monetary impulse is now behind us. So we're in an economy with a weakening consumer. Now, where that ultimately goes, well, that remains to be seen. I have my opinion on that, but I'm very open-minded as to maybe it's not going to dramatically impact the consumer. I think there's going to be a nasty earnings recession, but it might not. But I'll give you that. Let's say earnings stays the same. The other question is, as we are in an environment of increasing interest rates, and just to give you some real-time examples of that, when you look at a company like Rentokil that constantly has $2 billion of debt on its books, I mean, the debt that was priced in 2015, 2016, 2017 has a blended interest rate of about 70 basis points. At the beginning of last month, they went out and recapitalized that and raised almost $2 billion in debt. And that blended interest rate is pretty damn close to 4%. So it is a dramatic increase over the last 5 years of just the cost of debt. So even if earnings stays constant, you're living in an environment where we are now watching multiples contract. So if in an industry like pest control, we've seen the high end of the valuation spectrum contract 20% from November 2021 until July of 2022. And multiples, by the way, are still dramatically higher than they have been, literally over the last 40 years in that industry. I mean, when you're able to sell a business at 4.5 times revenue and 15 times EBITDA, that's a far cry from where it was 10 years ago at 6 times EBITDA and 1 or 1.1 times revenue. So if the multiple contracts, you really find yourself in a position where you're trying to catch a falling knife. And I think you need to spend a lot of time, don't get cute with that, because when you think about 2002, 2007, 2008. I mean, there were a lot of times when, I can think of the fall of 2008, which was probably one of the worst. 2008, 2009, from a deal maker's perspective, was the worst environment I'd ever seen. It was worse, quite frankly, than the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, because it was in that era where you saw, it was in the 2008 era where you saw just scores of transactions under LOI, guys a week or a day away from getting a massive check, and just companies pulling out left and right just because the environment was bad and there were no bright skies on the horizon. In the summer of 2022, we're just going into this. So where it goes, who knows? But there's a chance that we find ourselves in a position where this turns into the 1930s, it turns into the 1940s, it could turn into the 1970s, late 60s, again, late 70s, early 80s, where you have periods of 5 to 10 years, a whole decade of basically equity valuations taking a long, strange trip to nowhere, right? You're living in a decade of dismal returns. Another really important lesson that I've learned over the years, and we've all heard this saying, probably our mom told us this, maybe your Sunday school teacher told it to you, but don't be greedy. And, if you do your job right as a selling shareholder, you've gone out and you've hired the right advisor, the right investment banker, And that investment banker is greedy, right? You want to hire an investment banker that literally wants to clobber everyone in the head and just drag every single penny out. But if you've hired the right guy or right team, you've set up the right incentive structures, you should let your advisor be the one who's greedy, because as we start to get in the environment that we're in right now, it becomes increasingly important. You know, if I think back to the early 2000s and I think back to 2008, there were some transactions that never closed that should have closed because sellers got a little bit too greedy, or sellers found themselves in positions where buyers didn't like them. And I'm going back to this because in residential and services, the acquirers tend to be blue collar guys. I mean, even some of the big publicly traded firms, I mean, they're not bringing in, Harvard MBAs to run these businesses and execute these transactions for the most part. I know they wish they had the ability to do that, but unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to get talent into the industries in which we work in. I mean, I like so. In a lot of ways, these acquirers really do business with people that they like. And if you can run an M&A deal, you as a seller, I'm not talking about your advisor, I'm talking about you as a seller, if you can constantly be humble, if you can constantly be likable, if you could try to build a relationship with the people on the other side of the table that you're working with, and then you can resist all urges of being greedy at the very end. As the market finds itself in a very weak position, as other investment committees are saying, hey, M&A guys, operators, president, we're tightening down the hatches, we're not doing deals, kill the deals on the table, you're going to find yourself in a position where those executives are going to fight for you. And they're going to go to the board, they're going to go to the executive committee and the investment committee, and they're going to say, look, we made a commitment to this guy, we're closing this deal. If they don't like you, or if you're getting greedy, they walk away, and I've seen it. And so let me be precise with my words and define greedy. I've seen instances where owners are doing a $50 million transaction, right? The seller's getting $50 million, and immediately prior to the closing, he takes a firm stand on, hey, I'm doing a consulting gig for you, buyer, for a year. I want you to pay my $600 a month fuel allowance. Or I want you to be responsible for the air conditioning unit on my building, which I'm only leasing to you because you're actually willing to lease it. And quite frankly, you shouldn't be leasing it at all. You should just shut that office down, but you're trying to do me a favor, but I'm going to stick you with an AC bill, or I'm going to stick you with a meaningless fuel stipend. And it's my job as advisor to say, hey, listen, we're going to be nasty and greedy on purchase price, but at some point you've really got to give it up, and you can't focus on your monthly fuel allowance. And it's very hard, and I know business owners always want to win, and I know that business owners view these negotiations as not negotiating with people, but with the big corporate entity. But I remind all of you, before you ever go into an M&A process, do not for a single second think that you're negotiating with a big nameless corporation, because you are not. You're negotiating with people that have a job, they've got kids at home, their wives are bitching at them, they've got all of the same problems that you have. And then on top of that, they're dealing with somebody that they actually are looking down on, because, a lot of these guys go to the great schools. They did what their parents said. They said, listen, I'm going to go out there and get a good job and go to Yale and go and get an MBA and go and do this and go and do that. And here you are, somebody who started spraying lawns out of high school, and you've done a phenomenal job. You're a classic entrepreneur, but you've built this business, but they look at you as somebody who does not deserve to get what you're getting because of where valuations are. And then on top of that, you're going to moan about things, and I've seen it. So I wanted to talk today about important lessons I learned over the years. And as I sat here today, kind of thinking through it, a very important lesson that many of you never learn until it's too late is to be likable, be humble, and don't be greedy. The last thing I'll leave you with today is, if you are seriously considering exiting and selling your business here in the next 4 or 5 years, I think you really have to give consideration to where we are in this market cycle. This isn't a sales pitch for Potomac. I think for those of you who've known me, I have stood up and said when it's the right time to sell and when it's not the right time to sell. I actually really do care deeply for our clients. And I think if you don't know me personally, go to the POTOMAC TV and look at the Potomac Experience section of our YouTube channel. And I think that you'll see the relationships that we've built. Listen to the interviews that I've done on the Boardroom Buzz and some of the other recordings that we've done. I mean, I really care for these people. Come down and visit me in Puerto Rico. Every single week we have clients, we have acquirers. We're doing acquire meetings next week. The following week we're doing due diligence down here. And I have potential clients. Just last week we had folks that said, hey, Paul, thinking about hiring Potomac. Can we come down and speak with you? They came down, and there's been dozens here over the last few months that have done that. So if you want to come and meet me in Puerto Rico, come to meet me in Puerto Rico. I typically give meetings down here. If you want to come meet me in Milan, Italy, I'm happy to meet you in Milan. Thank you for joining me today in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I hope to actually see you in person down here sometime.